Today's show is brought to you by...
This program is made possible by the checkbook of Mr. Todd Burns and by contributions to our newly launched Patreon by viewers like you. Visit patreon.com/homebrew happy hour and join our community. Thank you.
Entertaining shows with content that spreads information and sparks discourse throughout the community. This is the Brau Media Network.
Hello and welcome to the Homebrew Happy Hour. This is the show where we supply the answers to your homebrewing questions and discuss all things related to craft beer. If you have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, visit homebrewhappyhour.com and click on that submit a question link at the top of the page. Or now you can call or text them in by using 325-305-6107. I am your host, Joshua Stubing, and today I am joined by Rob Partin, who is a homebrewer out of Virginia. He's the man behind Perfect Brewing, which can be found on Instagram at Perfect Brewing. Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
And I'd like to point out real quick, because somebody on our YouTube last week pointed it out. This is the second week in a row where I didn't mute the guest leading into the actual content. I think I deserve something, like a pat on the back or something. And actually, if I end up... So I have to do a little behind-the-scenes spoiler for listeners, too. So we are recording this on... November the 6th, which is a Wednesday, and it's actually not publishing until the following week. When you're listening to this, it's already, what is that? That's going to be November, if my calendar wants to come up. November the 14th is when you're listening to this. But because of Todd and James ditching me and going to Germany, my plan was, I'll have Rob on and I'll publish it on the 7th, and that'll be good. And then I'll do a follow-up with Todd and James when they're in Germany. And Todd and James are like, no, we don't want to do that with you. We're going to be having too much fun. We have no plans to set aside time to record an interview for you. You're not important, blah, blah, blah. They said some other derogatory stuff. But anyway, so if I end up muting them on this week's episode, then all that stuff about 2 in a row won't matter, because then I'll just be batting 33 or whatever. I don't follow baseball. But anyways, Rob, my man, thank you. First off, your setup behind you, that looks great. I love taplist.io. Shout out to them. My favorite way to display. Are you using like the Amazon Fire Stick app version, or are you using Brew Pie or whatever?
Fire Stick, yeah.
I love it.
So easy.
It's so easy. And I know we do that at my pop's house, and I have it set up to where like he is so amazed, and I'm really so amazed too. I can just update it from here, right? I don't have to be there to update it. So when we change the taps, I'm like changing the artwork, and he goes out into the little game room where the kegerator's at, and he's like, the artwork just changed, like, this is amazing. I'm like, I know, we live in 2019. Isn't technology is the best. So this is the first time we've ever met, but I do like to give credit where credit's due. You were one of the winners on our label contest. Was that in August? When did we do the label contest? I'm blanking.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. I should know more. Time flies. Did you know it's almost 2020, Rob? I don't know if you got the memo, but what we did with the voting, we put all the, I forget if there was like 40 or 50 something people that ended up submitting unique designs. Yours, we all put in our votes for the top 3, and then we compromise between there. I want you to know, and I'm throwing Todd and James under the bus because they're not here to defend themselves. You were my pick, man. I love 8-bit kind of design. I don't know. You look like a rather young fellow, so you're probably younger than me, but the 8-bit generation of gaming is what I grew up with. It had some nostalgia. It hit me kind of in the feels, seeing yours. And I'll put the artwork in the show notes of this, since I'm stupid and forgot to call it up on the screen. But Dead Ales Tell No Tales, I think, was the name of your winning label. I have to ask, the label looked great. How did the beer turn out? Like, because that's always...
Awesome. Yeah, that was actually probably one of my favorite. It was the first time I'd ever used coconut too. So I was a little weary, but it turned out great. And I was like, okay, I'm going to need to use coconut for a lot more stuff, and definitely try and do a stout with it, because that was just a cream ale. it was good because it was subtle, but trying to do a stout with some other flavors going on, and then the coconut on top of that.
Yeah, I almost wanted to make it a stipulation of the contest that y'all had to send in the beer, but I don't know the logistics how that would have worked out. See, people are starting to catch on that this is all about me and like trying to get stuff out of you guys. No, I'm kidding. It sounded delicious. There were the other people I forget in the contest. A lot of Kolsch entries, and I know what you guys were doing. I'm on to y'all. They just assumed I'm going to enter a Kolsch, and Josh is going to vote for me. And ultimately, even if Todd and James had picked something else, I'm going to pick the winner because they don't do the production stuff. But the artwork that we got submitted, I'm really impressed with how much work homebrewers put into, because it's basically a hobby, right? Like, I'm kind of jumping the gun. We'll come back to like your history as a homebrewer, but your artwork, your canning setup, if people follow you on your Instagram, which is at Pixel Perfect Brewing, it looks like a professional setup, man. Like what, like, do you, what's your thought process into having that professionalism in the presentation of your beer, not just the taste of your beer?
A lot of it's like, so one way I kind of was able to sell a lot of the stuff I've done to my fiance was, hey, like, we did ever, open a brewery. We're doing a trial run right now. That's what it is. So a lot of that's just been, we'll have friends and family over and just kind of host events. Like for Halloween, every year we do a thing called like Hollowtoberfest, and we just mix up Halloween and Oktoberfest into one. And that was actually the biggest one I'd done. We had 5 taps, all homebrew, and then we had 3 different can options as well. But a lot of it's really just trying to like, okay, if I wanted to like pretend I was doing this professionally, could I do it? Could I like keep up with brewing that much beer? And could I keep up with doing these labels and doing all that stuff? So for me, it's almost like a trial run if I ever were to like make the jump.
So what's the verdict? Like, can you keep up? Can you do it?
A lot of, thankfully, I guess from my dad, I wouldn't say I'm an insomniac, but I'm like definitely a night owl. So I operate on about 5 hours of sleep normally, and that's like a good, like, oh, I got a good amount of sleep. So I'll be up pretty late brewing, and that's like, okay, I know, I can put in the hours. Not that sometimes it's like, why am I doing this as a hobby?
Oh yeah. Well, and I can also tell you're young and you don't have kids yet, right? Like
Yes. It's much easier when, the only person I got to worry about is like, if it's 11 o'clock, it's, oh yeah, I got to let the dog out the one last time for the night, and not, there's a baby crying in 2 hours.
Yeah. And also the operating on 5 hours of sleep. I'm like, oh, this guy's in his 20s. All right.
Yep.
That's awesome. So rewinding now, because I do like when we do these homebrewer showcases, some of my favorite info to get out of you guys is like what led you to wanting to homebrew. Did it start? A lot of people, it starts with like their infatuation with craft beer, in their early, at some early point, a friend, a colleague, a coworker, a family member gave them that like kind of life-changing beer. So for you, what was it that got you into homebrewing? Because we're going to get to it here in a little bit, but viewers of the video version can tell from your backdrop that you're taking it pretty serious. You have a pretty sweet looking brewing operation. So what started that, and what was the spark that got you to where you're at today?
I would say probably, so right after college, me and my buddies did like a Europe trip. And we hit Germany, we hit Prague, we hit like, all the good beer places. And really drinking a lot of the beer there, and then coming home and like, cause that was what, 2000, early 2000. It was before this decade. But when we did that, like just coming back, and then it was like getting into a lot of the, foreign beers and the imported beers, and the craft beer scene really hadn't taken off quite yet. And then as that started to take off, getting into like, Ballast Point was like the first, like, oh, we've got craft beer now. And then it exploding into like Richmond, we have like 25 like local craft breweries now. But that all kind of got into, me getting into beer and starting with when I was, just like 21, like, oh, I'm going to try Mr. Beer Kit. And then, it either, I do one and it's like, oh, this turned out okay. And then you do another and it's like, yeah, this one doesn't taste so great. And then I kind of laid off that for a while and, was more into like exploring different beers. And then the past probably 2 years or so have been like, okay, like my fiance and I were long distance. I was like, I've got the time. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to fully go in and commit. And as you can see, I fully committed to it.
All or nothing. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. I love also, quick shout out, God bless Mr. Beer. They get crapped on so much by people, but how many of us, like I actually never did a Mr. Beer, but that I bought my dad before I was ever in this industry. I was probably 19 years old, and Spencer's Gifts used to be a thing at the mall. I haven't been to the mall probably since I was 19, so I don't know if they're still a thing, but Mr. Beer was, Spencer's Gifts was all these like knick-knack gifts, gag gifts, and just funny stuff or whatever. But I remember a Mr. Beer Kit, and like, oh, my dad likes beer, probably, he drinks Lone Star. Maybe he'd like to brew his own kind of beer. And granted, that didn't set any kind of flame. It did not spark joy in him at that time. But we started doing extract after the fact. And extract brewing is just a godsend to people, I think, to craft beer enthusiasts in general, because it gets people into wanting to brew. It gets them more interested in beer. And not everyone has the time to do an all grain day. My dad and I just did a breakfast stout clone last Sunday, the day after Learn to Homebrew Day, and I tell you what, man, it's a whole day. I forgot, like I forgot every all grain batch we do. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is all day. Like if we just did extract, I would have eliminated like a few hours, man. I'm lazy, I admit it, but no, Mr. Beer, they get too much flack. But anyway, so how long were you brewing the extract before you made I'm assuming just by your setup that you are doing all grain. What kind of sparked that? Was it kind of to have more control over your styles, or to be that like more, I want to actually feel like I'm brewing more? Like what got you, what did that little hump over from extract to all grain for you?
I would say the biggest thing was I kind of got to a point where I was like, all right, I feel like I've done well with the extract. And then the biggest transition was, you start with kind of like basic, like it's just extract. And then the big turning point for me was like, oh, started to incorporate steeping grains. And then once you start incorporating those and you realize how much more flavor and more body you're getting out of it, then you're like, okay, if I were to go all grain, how much more would I get out of doing that? So that was kind of the big step for me. And the other thing too, because a lot of people actually, not necessarily the Pico Brew Zithmatics, but the like actual just like regular Pico Brew, the packs. A lot of people, have strong opinions about them. I'll say that about like, oh yeah, you're just sticking it in whatever. But that was a huge impact on me being able to, because I'm a Zithmatic too, being able to figure out how to, like what grains I need to put in, because you get a Pico pack and then just kind of like, oh, I like this, and this is what was in it. It tells you all the grains and all that, and they've got the yeast that they provide, and then kind of being able to take that and say, I really like that, but maybe if I tried a little bit more crystal, like would that make a difference? And then tampering or messing with the recipe from that standpoint.
Were you an early adopter? Like, did you do the Kickstarter for them, or what got you into Pico? Because I know, like, a lot of my friends they couldn't care less about brewing, but they're tech heads. I know maybe the first. I don't want to make up stuff. I forget the first machine that Pico put out, but a lot of my friends were just from a standpoint of like the tech behind it. It was like, oh, it's like a Keurig. Okay, I could do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
What piqued you on Picos?
Similar. So, my day job is in IT. So like that was the same thing, like the tech, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I got to get one. And I wanted to get back into brewing. So I got one of those, started doing that. And then I was like, all right, let me start doing some extract again. So I started doing extract again, and then started doing the steeping, and then rolled into doing the all grain. And then from there I was like, well, I still really like the Pico setup. So I was like, maybe I'll go ahead and, just get a Zithmatic, and that way I can kind of have the all grain aspect of customization, but also still have that automated pico stuff, which, they, like I said, they get flack sometime, but they do a good job, and their support's really good.
They do. And the only flack I want to give them is that Andy Johnson always forgets me. And I know I gripe about that all the time on here. And I've had emails where people say, get over it, man. But no, I can't, guys. I can't. I have a really hard time letting go. When I see her again at HomebrewCon next year, it's going to be the 12th time I've introduced myself to her. But besides that, Peter's great. Wonderful people. No, but kidding aside, it really is. I like ingenuity and I like innovation, and they saw this market opportunity because, again, trying to find silver lining, because there are people, 99.9% of our community as homebrewers are very cool. They're very laid back, but there's some people, even as cool or as laid back as they are the majority of the time, they get a little snobbish. It happens. I do that sometimes. When I see my dad drinking Lone Star, maybe I say something. I don't know. I could be rude, but people look down at that automation and go, that's not brewing. Or they'll even do that to extract brewers, or, that's basically Blue Apron. You're not brewing. But then because I'm an instigator, I'm like, well, are you growing your grains? Or are you like how far back do we got to go to make it a real brewer? Like, come on, if you're producing good beer, I have produced, and this is all kudos to James Carlson, because they're his recipes and he hooks me up. When I was doing extract brewing, I was making phenomenal beer, and now I'm making pretty decent beer still with all grain. But like, as long as the beer is good, that's all I care about at the end of the day. I don't care how it was brewed. If there was a macro brew I could think of off the top of my head that I really liked, I'd say that just to get the hate mail. But Pito gets pooped on. But back to the meat and potatoes of this podcast. So wait, is your primary brew system are you still using Pico, or what's the average brew day for you? What equipment are you brewing on today?
So average, if I'm doing something small batch, I was using just my pot over the stove. But I have switched recently to the RoboBrew, which I love that thing. It's awesome. I actually am thinking about upgrading because I've got the 5-gallon one, to upgrade to the 10-gallon. I think it's the Brewzilla.
The Brewzilla, yes.
Yeah, but honestly, that was such a big game changer, just having the pump and then the spigots. And like, especially I do a lot of IPAs, and being able to kind of run the pump through the pipe or through the hop spider and have a whirlpool in there. Oh, it's awesome.
Life-changing, right? Yeah, no.
Yeah.
We had James, for the longest time before they got the spite system, he was doing all his small batches on the Grainfather. And the first time I ever did a brew day up there with them on the Grainfather, I was like, oh, I want a Grainfather. I don't have $1,000 just to throw around. And I think, again, thanks to innovation and competition, RoboBrew, Mash and Boil, now the Foundry, we did a brew day. Joe and I were recording a brew day on the Foundry while Todd and James were doing a simultaneous brew day on the Spite system. And I gotta tell you, man, I forgot how fun it is on those little all-in-one systems. And all-in-one, this is when people are going to write in the comments, like, they're not really all in one because you still use a kettle for your sparge water or your whatever, all the various things where you can't do it all in there. I think you technically could do a brew day all in just that vessel. But if you already have the other equipment, it just makes it easier to not try to do it all in one. But how long have you been using the RoboBrew, and what are your overall thoughts? Like, what do you like about it? What don't you like about it? And like, is that, for you, if you get the Brewzilla, is that kind of the end all for you, unless you turn to this professional, or do you have even bigger gear ideas for your brew day and what you're trying to accomplish?
I would say, so I've been using the RoboBrew I've probably done about 5 batches on it now over the past like 4 months. And really liked it. I don't know that the Brewzilla would be an end all for me, because it's one of those where originally it was like, oh, this would be great. I'll go, I've got these, because originally I was doing the pot. The most I could do if I was doing all grain was like maybe a 2.5 gallon, and then an extract about 4 gallons. So then I was like, oh, I want to do an extract brew in the robo brew, I can get all the way up to, like 7 gallons, or if I want to do an all grain, like I can get my full 5 gallons out of it. But that quickly became too little. So now I'm like thinking about moving up to the Bruzilla and doing the 10. But ideally, I eventually will move up to, I'm trying to remember the exact name of it. It's a company out of Colorado, but they do it's a nano brew system that's like, it's essentially like a robo brew, but like in an actual stand with a electric pulley and everything to then like pull the grain basket out and all that. But that's a 15 gallon. I think I eventually would like to settle on a half barrel system. Someday, not anytime soon, but someday.
You're taking your time. You're not jumping ahead for what I am impressed by a lot of people who do, and they're very successfully, but they start brewing and then like in January for conversation's sake. And then by December they have a nano pilot system and they're doing a nano brewery stuff. Like, oh, it's just my hobby. Oh, it's just my hobby. It's like, oh my gosh, I wouldn't know what to do with all that beer. Looking behind you right now, what you have, I've been trying to pay attention to your Pixel Perfect Brewing scrolling thing. You have 6 on tap. How many beers do you have on tap right now behind you?
Well, so unfortunately, my favorite kicked, which was the Oktoberfest. We finished that one pretty quickly. But I've got a Dunkelweizen on tap. I've got a sparkling blackberry ale. It was kind of a happy accident. I was shooting to like, you know what? I'm just gonna make a hard seltzer that's easy for everybody to drink. Totally, I ferment everything under pressure. I had a sputting valve malfunction on me and it was not venting correctly. So the CO2 actually just like smothered the yeast. So it ended up not fermenting as dry as I wanted it to, but then I threw some blackberry on there, actually about 3 pounds of blackberry, and let that kind of eat up a little bit more. And it came out at like 4%, but slightly sweet, but still just that it tastes like a hard seltzer, but it's like almost, it's that blackberry color. It's really cool. It was, again, a happy accident. Like it turned out really well, but it was not what I was going for.
I feel like that is the tagline that marketers should use for hard seltzer anyways. Like they didn't know it was going to take off that big. Like White Claw, it could just be the White Claw logo and then a happy accident. Cause I still don't understand. I love fancy water. I've never actually had a White Claw. I've had a Mighty Swell, which they're out of Austin where I'm at. And it was delicious. I just didn't get it because they're expensive too. But we should do a hard seltzer, Todd. I know you listen to this sometimes. Seltzer is a crowd pleaser, right? Like right now, especially, or during the now is in like the time we're living in now. During the summer, I mean, every company was coming out with their own version of it. I think Natural Light had their best year ever thanks to their seltzer. Who would have thought we'd be saying that, right? Natty Light having a good year. But a bunch of companies jumped on that. After White Claw took off, people were like, hey, I want to appeal to middle-aged white women too. No, I'm kidding. Sorry. I'm not going to cut that out because I'm lazy, but people are going to write me. So do you brew, because you have I see again on the scrolling thing and all the tabs, do you typically brew to please you or to experiment, or like do you have a distinction between the beers that you brew because you enjoy the drink or the beers you brew because you're trying to please people? Is there some happy medium as a home brewer who does serve a lot? As I could tell from behind you, what is your process into going into your next brew day?
It's a little bit of both. Again, keeping in mind, like the whole thing for me has always been like, all right, how can I challenge myself to like, can I get this style down? Can I get this next style down? So I'll do a lot of that. But again, a lot of it's geared towards both for people and then stuff that I'm interested in trying to brew. And I'll try and line it up with what's seasonal too. So like, for example, like all those were, Oktoberfest related. The other keg we kicked was, I did a pumpkin ale. That one got drank real quickly. But I always typically have, and that's, I'm sure it's anywhere else in the country, but especially in Richmond, we have a lot of craft breweries that are very focused on New England style IPAs. So I always have at least one or two of those on tap because that's like, those always get drank.
They do.
But a lot of it's,
go ahead.
Sorry. A lot of it's just, again, experimenting with those different stuff. And like, okay, like this is the first Oktoberfest I did. And actually shout out to y'all, because so that one I did as an extract recipe, but I had the steeping grains. And I remember somebody had submitted a question about, can you do decoction on steeping grains? And I was like, let's find out. And I did, and oh my gosh, it was so good. The like caramel notes that came out of that, I just would have never expected to come from an extract recipe. It was crazy.
Decoction is not only a fun word to say, but it's actually purposeful. Like I am surprised too, James. You know, there are parts of brewing where, again, I can't stress enough how lazy I am, people. Time efficient, or whatever the other phrase I use. But if you take the time, even a single decoction, just what it can do to the end product in the body, and like you said, in the notes that you get from the process to those grains, it is incredible. And did you brew your Oktoberfest like traditionally? Like, did you start it in March, or did you brew it and just lager it like towards the end of the summer going into the fall season?
No, I actually did. So even shorter than that. So and that was another thing when I got back into like, I'm going to start brewing again. I decided, I was like, I don't really want to have a bunch of fermenters around. But I'm willing to invest a bunch of kegs because you can do tons of sorts of stuff with them. So I got a ton of corny kegs, and I actually have one large, it's a half barrel keg that you can seal up, and it's got a fermenting thing in it and all that. But everything I do is under pressure. So I did that lager under pressure. So it was about 7 days at 62-ish, 63-ish degrees. And then kind of let it bump up to about 68 to do the, I'm going to say it wrong, diacetyl rest. But to do that rest. And then after that, I transferred the keg, and it only sat like conditioning for maybe, say, about a month and a half. But I mean, it was bright. It tasted great. I mean, and that's actually, I looked in a lot to, Brewlosophy actually has, like, they talk about doing I think it's it might be their Vienna lager recipe, but they talk about their process of doing it under pressure and like, the 2-week turnaround and all that. I wanted to give it a little bit longer than that, because I was like, you know, I've got the time, I've got, 2 months before I need to serve it. So I'll give it the time to age a little bit, but that process worked really well. And I actually ended up, I was like, okay, I got all the stuff. I'm getting married next weekend. So after that, after the wedding and the honeymoon, I'm going to do another Oktoberfest, because it came out so well doing it under pressure.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I was going to say that process is good when you don't have the time. I mean, it's good all the time, but if you don't have the time, the process is wonderful. What made you? I'm curious now. What made you? Have you always done it under pressure, or was there a particular like changing point for you where you're like, I'm going to start doing that because of insert reasons here?
And this is, I don't want to rag on Mr. Beer, so sorry, Mr. Beer. The one thing I noticed, so like once I kind of knew more about brewing, their fermenters, like the old ones they used to have with the screw-on cap and all that, they had holes in them. So it was kind of like there was always some potential for something, and that's where you got the inconsistency for something to kind of get in there. Where I was like, it made sense to me that if you ferment in a keg, it's really a contained environment. If you sanitize that keg completely and it's sealed up and it's pressurized, there's no reason you should have oxidization. There's no reason you should have an infection. There's just so many like great benefits to that. The only drawback is you're really limited to either, if you've got a big batch, you've got to split it into 2 kegs and ferment in 2 of them, or just do a 4-gallon. But that's where I ended up getting that half barrel one, because it's got plenty of headspace, and doing that in there. And I really would like to get more of those, but those those were not cheap. So
I was just saying,
it's a one day.
But budget stuff typically prohibits us from like, because I don't know if you listen. I think it was 2 weeks ago. I confessed that I have this year from January to present day. I've gone from like, oh, my dad, I'm gonna build you out this cooled room. We're gonna use that cooler bot setup, and we're gonna have a walk-in cooler. And then I'm like, oh no, maybe we'll go a little bit cheaper, and we'll get like and believe it or not, it is a little bit cheaper to get like a glycol setup and like a spike, like CF15 conical, real nice. You could do things under pressure there. Transferring is easy. And then now I'm like, you know what? For fermentation, let's just tape some ice packs to our carboy and call it a day, Pop. Like, we're like, money is funny how, like, if what our setups would look like. And actually, that's a great segue for me. Is that, like, if money wasn't an object, is that the first thing you would do is pick up more of those so that you could have some multiple fermentations going on in your ideal setup? Is that your perfect upgrade if you had just unlimited funds to do an upgrade today?
Yeah, most likely is to upgrade to the more anything I could do a pressurized fermentation in. Because another big thing too is that I feel has made a huge difference in especially those New England IPAs, doing the closed transfer between kegs. And then one thing I started doing recently where I felt like I got a little bit less oxidization was actually purging the line to do the transfer was something that I was like, oh, maybe I should do that too. So I started trying that. But yeah, I definitely would upgrade to those. And I actually like, after I started doing this, I got a little bit of affirmation because I was stumbled upon a blog. There's a brewery around here called Crooked Run. It's up in Leesburg, Virginia. But the guy who owns that, when he was like, he started off with like a half barrel system. He was responding to all these comments, and actually he was like, yeah, if I could do it again, I just wanted to keep it at that size. Like, I would just end up getting, those half barrel, the 1/4 barrel fermenter kegs and ferment in those because they're stackable too, which is really nice. So you can just stack them and stack them and stack them. They're heavy. They're not fun to move around though.
Yeah, maybe a young, in shape man like yourself, but for me, I need wheels, I need casters. I wanted to, one of the main reasons too, I'm segueing, I'm terrible at segues, but one of the main reasons I really wanted to get you on too was I started following you on Instagram shortly after that contest, or we may have actually been following you before. Either way, what a lot of people write in, we are not big on bottling. I don't know if you know that about us on the show. Bottling is just not enjoyable to me. I used a Blickman beer gun recently and it became more enjoyable. It wasn't as big a pain as I remembered it being, but that was we were going from keg to bottle. We weren't bottling from, fermentation, or after fermentation, pardon me. But what, like you got into canning. I want to know first, how did you even get to that? 'Cause it's not, canning seems to be like even the most super niche in a hobby that's already pretty niche, which is brewing your own beer. Did you start bottling first and then keg and then retroactively go, you know what, it'd be pretty cool to hand out some cans? Like, what was your process as a home brewer? Because your canning looks spot on and your artwork just looks phenomenal. We'll talk about the artwork afterwards too and canning tips, but what got you to can and what is your process? Are you brewing in batches where you're trying to keep a certain number on tap, draft, and then can, or is it just kind of free for all? Like, oh, someone wants some of this to take home, let's can it for them.
So I got into canning primarily from just like, we were always going to different breweries and picking up cans, and I was like, and they were smaller ones too. I mean, they're just local to Richmond. And I was like, it's really cool. Like, and I loved label art too. So I was like, I feel like there's a different feel with a can with the way the label art is, and you get the full wraparound and all that. So I really wanted to do that. And then also just realizing too, a lot of the very sensitive, like doing an IPAs or IPA, anything that's heavily hopped, you're putting it into a mini keg basically. So you're really getting the best sealing on that and the best, it's going to stay freshest, longest, those type of beers. So that really got me into that. And with that being said, like, I also started thinking about, because like the room I'm in is, I just built it around being a brew shed and being able to do stuff, but primarily around having like a canning station. And I need to get like there's a video I think on my Instagram of like when it was not walled in and pretty like this. But you can see like I've got 2 stations, like a purge station. So I purge the can with CO2, and then I fill it, and then you just go down the assembly line and you seal it. And then I've got like a label thing too, so you can just move it in an excellent and crank it if you want. But yeah, a lot of it was when I like do my batches as well. Sometimes, so I do a river trip every year. It's 20 miles down the Shenandoah, just in a canoe. And instead of buying beer this year, we actually were like, like, can you do it? I was like, yeah, I think I can do it. So I brewed 3 batches, 3 5-gallon batches, and I canned all of them. So we had a ton of canned beer, which worked out really well. But I'll do that sometimes if I know I've got an event coming up. I'll do that where I'll brew it just specifically canned. Most of the time what happens is we'll have an event, we'll have people over, we'll drink what's brewed, and then whatever's left, I end up canning that off. And it's a really great way to like kind of get some of like the stuff I've got out here into the house, or if somebody wants to try stuff that couldn't make it out, like, I can just give them a can. But they just feel better than bottles, and they also, it's the freshness. There's such a big difference, and they hold carbonation so much longer.
I've heard that, and yeah, because cans have just been booming, right, in the craft scene, and I have friends, and I'll be honest, like people sometimes think this is a shtick when I'm like, I'm dumb and I don't know anything. No, I'm pretty dumb and I don't know anything. I don't know the science behind it, but I notice that too, especially with IPAs. Out of a can just seems like it holds better. And like you said, the carbonation too, it's not draft. And that might, again, I might not be smart enough to understand if it actually is closer to draft than I think it is, but it's pretty stinking close to the draft experience, popping up a can. We have area breweries around here in the Austin area. You go get a crowler and you take it home, and it is incredible how, like I said, similar to the draft experience. Like, oh, this is pretty much spot on from when I'm there, getting them to pour it into a pint glass for me. It's a cool thing. Well, now you're telling me, I'll can when people come over and as a gift or whatever. Do you even go through the process of labeling it for them too? Like if it's a random Friday night party and someone's like, you're like, I got spit in the corner left of this keg. Who wants to take a can home? Are you a nice enough guy? Do you also label it? Because your whole setup, people really do got to follow you on Instagram. I'm just so impressed just that you have the willpower to do all that, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like if I had a sleever, which I know those aren't cheap, to just on my cans, and I had some automated process, I would can too. But no, kidding aside, like what are you labeling everyone as a means of like presentation, because I know those labels can't be cheap.
No, I am, and that's, if it's for me, I typically like, I've got some cheap like right on label, I just slap them on. If it's for me, I won't do it. But if it's for other folks, yeah, I always throw. I've got a generic Pixel Perfect can wrapper. That's just like the same. Like if you were to get a crowler at a place, like it's not specific to the beer, I'll throw one of those on. If it is a beer that I do have a label ready for, then I'll do. I actually just did that a couple of weeks ago. My fiance, like we were hosting a baby shower for one of her friends, and her brother is actually like the head. I don't know what you call them, if they're at a cidery, if it's a brewer, or if it's a cider. I don't know what the term is.
You say what you want to say, and I'll let people direct the hate mail to you, Rob.
Okay. But yeah, head brew guy to cidery. We'll go with that. But I was getting him some to take home, but it was one that I actually had like a prefab label because I've done cans of it before. So I sat there and like, he was in here and he helped me, and we just kind of labeled them all after we canned them off.
That's awesome. That was going to be my next question was, do you keep, because I know listeners, canning is one of those things where it's like, oh, I want to do that because it looks so cool. Is there any advice you can give listeners or just equipment picks? Like, are you using, what's the one out of More Beer selling? Cannular is one. October is a bit popular one that sells home canners. Are you using one of those mainstream ones people can buy, or is it a setup you made? And then also with your labels, are you using like a sticker U or a grog tag, or you have your own home setup? And if you do, then like, what was your thought process behind the way you do it and why you do it that way?
So for canning, I'm using the October, which I've really loved. Really well made. It's high quality. The only thing I was a little bummed about was like I sat on that purchase for a while because it was a big purchase. And then 2 weeks after I bought it, the cannular became available for half the price. And I was like, wish I would have known. But I've heard mixed things. I've heard some people, because I've mentioned the cannular, other folks who have asked me questions. And then I've heard other folks that are like, I haven't had, some people have, the cannulars work fine. Some people have said I might go ahead and get an October because you might get a little bit more for what you paid for as far as like parts and all that. And it is also nice to like most of the breweries that going around here, they're using an October system. So it's kind of like, okay, like, if that's what they're using, then there's got to be something behind it. But yeah, I'm using the October, which I really liked. But yeah, sorry, what was your other question?
Oh no, for labels too, like because people October, and I'm glad you said that. I know a lot of people use an October and they love it, and yeah, it is a little pricey, but if you're getting into it, you want to do it right. No, but for labeling, one tip, people will write in and ask me, because I do a lot of the design work for Homebrew Supply and Keg Connection, like all the recipe artwork and that, and people are like, oh, I want to make labels, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm lazy. When we bottle, I'm literally just getting like sticker mule or sticker U, and I'm just slapping them on because I don't care. I don't know, I don't have good advice to give listeners who are like, no, I want to do canning at home and I want to do it right. So are you outsourcing the printing, or do you have a recommendation on how people can do it and have their best foot forward if they're going to be canning and labeling their cans?
So I was using, I believe they're called Keg Collar, and basically they're a commercial company that makes the majority of when you get a keg and it's got that little, label seal on top of it. They're doing that, but they just got into doing bottle labels. I don't know that they knew I was a home brewer, to be honest. I just kind of like, and I just rolled with it. I was just like, yeah, I'm looking at purchasing these labels and here's the artwork, and like, oh, I need them by this date because I've got an event going on. Like, I just, I didn't say anything. They didn't ask, so I just went with it. But they were awesome to work with, and I believe it's Keg Collar.
Yeah.
But they were great to work with. They also, like, I didn't want 2,000 of one label. I was like, if I'm going to invest into this, like, I want several different beer styles. So I did, they worked with me I did 8 separate rolls of 250 labels. So I have 8 different beers that I have can labels for now. But they're really nice. I've got, so like, this is one that I've got. This is the River Sipper, but they're just like super, they're matte and they're completely waterproof. Like, we threw them in the cooler when we went on that canoe trip. And just like, they don't peel at all. They don't come off. And the sweet thing is too, like, when you're done with them too, if you really wanted to, you can peel those suckers right off and reuse them.
Oh, that's awesome. That was clean too, by the way. People, the vast majority of our audience is still audio only. I mean, I'll put some of your artwork into the show notes at homebrewhappyhour.com, but they really need to see the YouTube, because your artwork, that is one thing I've noticed, very clean. It comes out very clean. That's a nod to you and a nod to the printer. Nice. Because I've done artwork and had bad printing, and you can't. There's only so good artwork you can have that can compensate for bad printing. Like if your labels hadn't come out as clean as they did like that, it doesn't matter how much effort or time you put into your label. You're gonna be like, oh, I don't really want to put this on the can because it's a bad print job. So that is good to know. And then you actually you use a hand crank labeler, don't you? Or at home, like for actually applying it, you're not going there by hand and doing the.
Sometimes, so I use the Easy Labeler. It's like the one instance I was telling you about where like I had that one where I was like, oh, I've got the actual beer style that I'm giving you. Like, let's slap some labels on real quick. I didn't want to change the rollout on the labeler, so we just peeled them off. And if you do them while they're cold, so if you can them cold and then throw the labels on, they stick with no air bubbles. And
Really?
they're actually sometimes just as easy to do by hand as they are to do on the crank. Because sometimes like you'll crank a few and then it might get off center a little bit and you got to redo the adjustment. If you got them cold, just like right after you package and you can slap a label on, they go on great.
That's good.
Particularly for that material. I don't know about others, but like the ones that I got, like I said, they were so water wicking and resistant, like they went on awesome while the cans are cold.
That is awesome. And then one more question that I know I'm going to get as a follow-up, so I might as well ask it now if you don't mind divulging. Sure. Are you buying the cans from October, or where, like, do you have a recommendation to listeners on where you source your cans or where they can maybe get because they're not terribly expensive, but they're not also, all of this is an investment. So I don't want to go down that rabbit trail, but where are you sourcing your cans from? And what brand do you trust for if you're going to be canning beer for people?
I went through October just because when I got the canner, shipping was already baked in to go ahead and get like another like big box of cans. But I have been looking around a little bit. There are places that again, if you're going to invest into it, you want to go ahead and stockpile. There are places that you can get the bright cans with the tops that you need to seal with for 16 cents a can. 12 cents a can, depending on what quantity you want to buy. So there are other places out there. I haven't run out yet. So when I do, I'll look into that. But October wasn't bad. I mean, I think I got close to 300 for like $70.
Oh, that's not bad. Yeah. I haven't priced it yet. Canning's one of those things again where I'm like, oh, I really want to do it. And then I'm like, no, the cost investment, it keeps me being like, do I really want to do it? But maybe, my dad he loved bottling. He's like, we could gift at Christmas and this and this. And I'm like, well, I would rather, if we're going to be doing that, if we're going to make the choice to not only offer our beer at his house on draft for family get-togethers, then I'd rather can than bottle. I don't know if you agree with that assessment. I'm assuming you do because all the canning you do. But I lied about one last question. Actually, I did have one written in from a listener, and I figured I'd throw it your way. The question was about what is the biggest issue you see with canning. A lot of these people that can start off and say there's oxidation issues. Is that kind of the first thing you ran into, or has canning been a pretty seamless experience for you? No pun intended.
I think you can run into that if you kind of hit into like two things. The one being purging the hell out of them is really the way to go. I almost, a lot of times, especially if I'm doing something I know it's like super oxidative sensitive, like a New England IPA, like I will, after I purged it, I'll kind of, put my nose in there. And if I get some burn, I'm like, okay, it's good. It's ready to fill. And then immediately filling it. And then it's the same as if you were bottling, you want to put that can top on foam. And that really creates a better seal. The other thing too, that's really important, because actually the first go around the cans I had some of those issues too, where like it was inconsistent. I'd pop one open and it was like, oh, this is that nice bright yellow. And then I popped one open and it was the same beer and it had almost gone brown. Like, what happened? And it's really the seaming. It's making sure that when you're doing your seams, you really like, and I don't know about the cannula. So for October, they recommend like you go, it's a hard stop. So you hear a click and then you hold for 1, 2, and then you come back and you do the other side, click 1, 2. When you've done that, you've essentially gotten the right seam. You can flip it off. And after that, like, you know, you can kind of tell if you didn't get a great seam, because you really should, it should feel like a highly inflated football almost. Like, you know what I mean? You shouldn't be able to put any indent into it when you squeeze it. But that's where those oxidation issues will pop up, is if you don't purge the can. You don't purge the can, you don't, you know, put the can top on foam. And then if you don't really make sure you go to the hard stop when you're sealing them with the canning machine. Another big thing too is the maintenance on them. You really got to make sure every time you do a batch, you put some keg lube on the joints and all that. It really makes a difference in the seams and the seals.
That's great advice. People are rushing to their, actually, I don't know where, there's no local October dealers. I was trying to make a joke. That's not funny. Where October does sell direct. I think that's the only way they sell, right? Cannular, I believe, goes through more beer. I'm not sure. Yeah. October, I think, is only direct buy. Again, I don't know, because I haven't put a lot of effort into canning. But again, it's one of those things where I'm like, if I can get Todd to spend his money on it, I would love the can. Because why shouldn't we be canning at headquarters, right, Todd? And then maybe I'll borrow the canner for a month or two and take it with my pop. I mean, we'll figure it out. But I know, again, I'm so glad that I could get you on the show to talk canning and wrap up the show on canning, just because I get so many questions. People know I don't prefer to bottle, and that's being polite, but they do ask, like, well, what about canning, man? What about canning? I'm like, I don't have an opinion on it, because I've never done it, and I would love to. I just don't have, I haven't had that jump into it yet. Would you recommend people who are listening to the show and listening to you talk about canning, like, to just dive right in? Was there anything that you wish you knew before canning, or is it an experience that you're glad that you do and would recommend to the average home brewer who wants to share their beer outside of where they're serving it, which is typically their home?
Go in and don't look back. It's been great. I've loved everything about it. I've loved doing the labels for it, like just getting that artwork together. It just at the end of the day, like, you're getting fresher beer, and the presentation is really cool. It's a fun process, and it's fun to do too. I enjoy it more than bottling. Bottling just felt tedious, and but you know, doing having to put like the capper and strain and push hard and all that. But yeah, I wouldn't look back. If you get into it, you're gonna love it, and it's definitely worth the investment. And over time, so much cheaper than bottles. The cans, the quantity wise. It's a good thing to do.
And they're better for the planet, right? Or is that just a marketing thing? I'm pretty sure I told, like, because they're actually fully recyclable, right? Not obviously bottles are reusable, but anyway, Rob, I do appreciate it. You taking the time and doing the show with me. And besides your Instagram, is there anywhere else people can find more info? I don't know if you have a website or if you do Facebook for Pixel Perfect, but what are some, if people want to even maybe write you in some questions, because you've been very vocal to me about accessibility and how you're willing to help people with questions about canning. Where is some places people can get more info on Pixel Perfect Brewing?
Sure. Instagram, so at Pixel Perfect Brewing. Also, if you want to email me directly, just rob@pixelperfectbrewing.com. And then we also, there's a Facebook page for Pixel Perfect Brewing as well. So any of those methods, more than happy to answer questions.
Right on. Again, my friend, thank you so much for doing the show. I would love to have you on a follow-up some point, and maybe if I get Todd into canning, we can do a live stream where you're just critiquing me and telling me that's gonna taste like cardboard, there's too much oxygen or something. We'll figure it out. But thank you so much for your time, man. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Absolutely. And that will do it for this episode of the Homebrew Happy Hour. If you have a question you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, go to homebrewhappyhour.com and click on the submit a question link at the top of the page, or now you can call or text them in by using 325-305-6107. Remember that these episodes are ultimately made possible by people like you. Consider joining our Patreon community by visiting patreon.com/homebrew happy hour and check out the awesome perks we have for our members. On behalf of Todd Burns and the Pearl Media Network, I'm Joshua Stubing. Thank you for listening.
This program is made possible by the checkbook of Mr. Todd Burns and by contributions to our newly launched Patreon by viewers like you. Visit patreon.com/homebrew happy hour and join our community. Thank you.